Episode 98 this week, We'll Always Have Paris. This episode had A plot, B plot, C plot, D plot all going on. None of them really went anywhere. They were all kind of jumbled. We got a bit of a mess. But the Enterprise was headed for some R&R after Tasha Yar was killed. They needed some R&R, but they got caught up in this time loop. Picard was fencing with a lieutenant we never saw before, never saw after this. They repeated a segment of time. Picard checks with the bridge. They're like, yeah, it happened here too. So Picard goes running up. They try to figure out what was going on. When they get a message from some planet that this scientist named Mannheim was calling for help, Picard knew who the guy was. He reacted to it. Troy saw that he reacted to it, so she's a little bit worried. Picard says, yeah, this guy was running time experiments, so it all makes sense. He disappeared like 20 years ago, but he was coming up with crazy theories. So they set course to this planet. Troy wants Picard to have a counseling session. He's like, no, that's okay. So he takes off. He ends up at the holodeck, and he reenacts this day from his life 22 years earlier, where he was supposed to go to a cafe to meet a woman, but he never showed up. So he reenacts that, tells this fictional holodeck woman that the person she was supposed to meet maybe was too scared to meet her. He was kind of making a parallel of his own life. They get to the planet, nobody's there. Then they get a set of coordinates for another planet, so they go to that planet, and this woman that Picard knows straight away answers them, and they're like, well, maybe she can help us. Picard doesn't even want to give his name. He just says he's a captain of the Enterprise. He started to say Picard, then stopped. Everyone kind of looked like that's weird. He gets her to shut off the force field. They beam her and her husband up to the planet, or from the planet to the ship. Picard takes Riker and Data with him to the sick bay. The woman's explaining that they lost the rest of their crew to some sort of accident. She knew like really vague generic stuff that her husband was doing experiments that caused trouble. Picard's like, yeah, we felt it thousands of light years away. She's like, oh no, that can't be good, but I don't really know the nature of the experiments. But he said he was close to a breakthrough. Dr. Crusher thinks that the guy is dying, but she can't really pinpoint why or how long he has. Then Crusher starts getting these like weird jealousy vibes where she's like sort of jealous of this woman that Picard used to know, but not fully. That becomes like a D plot where Troy's trying to get her to admit she's jealous, and Crusher's like, I can't compete with the ghost from his past, and I have a patient to attend to, and they get into that, and that whole storyline just basically disappears after this episode. But they try to go to the planet to shut down the experiment. They can't beam down, so they go back to the ship. Then the scientist Mannheim's like, here's the security codes. So he gives them what they need to shut things down. Picard sends Data alone because he thinks Data is the only one that can handle the defense systems and or the time experiments. It's really vague. Data's like, oh yeah, you're right. So Data goes down there. He finds some antimatter that he needs to put in some sort of device that'll shut down the experiment. Then there's 3 of them from 3 different times. He's like, which one of us is it? And the middle one's like, oh, it's me. He puts in the antimatter. It stops the experiment. Everything's perfectly fine from that. Picard and Mannheim's wife go back to that holodeck program. She can't believe that he created this. She apparently had no idea what a holodeck was. But Picard recreated the day perfectly. They basically say their goodbyes. She goes off with her husband, who wants to continue on with the experiments, even though the wife was terrified because they almost died. But she's like, well, okay, let's go back and finish, I guess. And Picard's like, yeah, I guess we'll go back and finish. Maybe the Federation will help you this time. Kind of like, yeah, you almost screwed that up. You better supervise it. And they finally go to their R&R, and they make Casablanca references there with a little bit of references to bars and stuff that are on the planet where they're going to go to spin R&R. That's basically the episode. Some interesting notes. The love interest of Picard was played by Michelle Phillips, who was with the Mamas and the Papas before getting into acting. Also, Data used contractions multiple times in this episode, even though they established that he cannot use contractions. He used them twice in this episode. Also, the episode a little bit sloppy because there was a writer's strike at this particular time when the episode was in production, so they had to kind of jerry-rig the ending of it because it hadn't been totally written yet, so they had to kind of muddle along best they could. That's why it kind of seemed like a jumbled mess. Also, it was the first full episode without Tasha Yar, where Worf was chief of security, even though Worf's part was pretty minimal. Also, no Will Wheaton this episode. Wesley Crusher nowhere to be found. And like I said, it was like kind of a one-off where Crusher experienced and gave off that she was jealous of another woman when it came to Picard. They always had like the off and on somewhat romantic subplot between Picard and Crusher, but nothing that was like that direct. So pretty much that's episode 98.